Using our intuition along with our intelligence as a guide can be the best way to produce really super ideas. Make it a habit to carry a folded sheet of paper along with a writing instrument at all times during the day. Ideas have a habit of making their appearance at unexpected times, in the shower, while driving the car, while having a meal. Watch for them at breakfast and lunchtime particularly, while taking a walk. Whenever the mind is in neutral, as I call it, ideas have an opportunity to bubble up to the surface and show themselves off. We won't always get our best ideas during think time, but by planting the problem we're working on deep in our minds, it seems that the great subterranean part of our mind works on the idea when we're doing other things. When it hits on a possible answer, it waits for a quiet time to slip it to the top for evaluation. Those ideas should be immediately written down for serious consideration. I believe that our intuition has a way of plumbing our racial memory, or searching what Teilhard de Chardin called the noosphere, an invisible layer of human intelligence that forms a mantle around the earth. How it works is a mystery. That it does work, we've all demonstrated at times during our lives. Planting a problem or question deep in the subconscious by first turning it every which way during an in-depth conscious attempt to solve it usually results in the answer eventually appearing completely unbidden in our consciousness. Of course, we often say, it's so obvious. But it was not obvious when we rotated it on the rotisserie of our consciousness. It seems to happen with more frequency for those who count on its happening, who expect it and watch for it, as a ship's lookout watches for a light in the darkness. Women tend to be better at this than men. They seem to live closer to their intuition. Perhaps it's because they've historically had to, since they lack the physical strength to challenge men on a more basic level. I took my grandson to lunch recently. He's 10 years old. As we walked to the car afterward, there were some young men working with picks and shovels and jackhammers in what appeared to be the demolition of a service station. They were surrounded by dense clouds of cement dust as, stripped to the waist, they wielded their jackhammer, heavy picks, and shoveled the broken concrete. I stopped, and pointing to the young workman, asked Danny if that's the kind of work he wanted to do when he grew up. He watched them quietly for a moment and then shook his head. In the car, I explained to Danny that when men and women perform purely physical work, they're not utilizing their greatest resource. Thinking men and women are using their resources in the proper order. We can think better, more profitably, and serve more people through ideas than we can ever do physically. And it's better for our health, too. Then we have the joy of using our physical bodies for more agreeable pursuits: tennis, golf, sailing, fishing, swimming, camping, hiking, mountain climbing, running, exercising. Ideas, the great ideas that move us to be better and greater than we now are the deeply embedded anchors that will hold us in place steadfastly when the great storms of life crash about us. They're the anchors that prevent our being intimidated or diverted from our path by expediency, fad, or demagoguery. Great ideas provide us with a set of sensors that can pick up the dishonest and the phony, revealing the cheap and shoddy and the so-called quick buck. Great ideas provide a lifelong security system for us without disturbing our sense of humor. In fact, our sense of humor is greatly enriched by such ideas, and smiling and laughter become important parts of our days. We're by no means immune to mistakes, but we understand that they're a natural part of growth and reaching into the unknown. The ideas we hold should be in concert with our goals if our goals are to be successfully achieved. We say, I have an idea. What is that? It's surely more than a neurochemical electrical response, although it's that too. An idea is the bringing together of known increments to provide a new result. Let's go to the beach, someone says. Without a moment's hesitation, we take the known beach factor, add it to existing transportation facilities, the proper clothing, possibly a picnic lunch, and suggest the resulting idea to those we're with at the time. It all happens instantaneously, although all sorts of interconnections are going on in our brains. The greater our general information, the more combinations we can put together, and the greater the reach of our possibility thinking, as Dr. Robert Schuller calls it. That's why young people should think twice before complaining about school courses they'll never use as adults. All information of a positive kind has value when we're formulating ideas. When we set an important goal for ourselves, we present to our mind a problem to be solved, a challenge to be successfully fulfilled. Instantly, far down in the labyrinthine interstices of its vast potential, the mind goes to work to find the information we need to turn that idea into reality. We commonly use this astonishing ability for ordinary things. For example, the idea of obtaining a particular automobile soon becomes a true automobile we can drive and wash on warm Sunday afternoons. Perhaps our path from inception of the idea to the time we get into the automobile, turn on the key, and drive away is rather tortuous, even circular, leading first here and then there. More often than not, we get in our own way by doubting the suggestions that filter into our consciousness, only to discover later that they would have been marvelous shortcuts and simplifications of the process if we'd only heeded them. But eventually, the idea, the invisible idea, becomes sheet steel and glass and upholstery and rubber, and from time to time a pain in the neck as well. The idea has become real in our lives, even if it takes 3 years to pay for it. We become what we think about, but the thinking is up to us, and the degree to which people regularly underestimate their capacity for accomplishment is immeasurable. Curiously, we think nothing of the accomplishments of others. That is, what others do we tend to take in stride. But when it comes to setting goals for ourselves, we tend to play things outrageously safe, and thus remain within limits embarrassingly small. Especially if there's some sort of maintenance program in effect. That is, if we have a job, though its real demands upon us are minimal, we will usually shut down any other efforts to prepare ourselves for 1, a much better, more interesting kind of work, or 2, any sudden emergency that might develop. I remember watching a television news program in which laid-off workers of a closed Navy yard were being interviewed. The announcer asked, "Well, what are you men going to do now that the Navy yard is closed down?" The man nearest to him said, "Well, I guess we'll just have to wait for it to reopen again." Another man said, "Oh, I've worked in this Navy yard for 25 years. I don't know anything else." Here were human cattle that could graze in only one pasture, if we're to believe them, and now that the pasture was no longer there, they'd simply sit down and waste away. In 25 years, in his spare time, a person could learn to do heart transplants. What were all these people doing with the 16 hours a day they were not working? What about weekends and vacations? Take a pen and paper and work out the number of hours the average working person is actually on the job during a typical year. Then subtract it from the rest of his or her waking time. If an hour a day were devoted to learning, to doing anything of a valuable nature, the ending of a job would be an incidental thing, perhaps an actual benefit. And how about think time? Any man who is responsible for providing for his family should have emergency plans A, B, and C, at least A. Just as a platoon leader in combat must ask himself, what if the enemy attacks at night? From the rear, on Sunday morning during breakfast. The family provider should ask and work out on that legal pad what to do if the company I work for goes out of business, or lets me go for any reason, or moves to Europe. It's the kind of thinking that a man and his wife can do together as well as separately, and as a result have several possible courses of action. And in the meantime, how about that educational program in my main field of interest? I certainly don't want to be as dumb 5 years from now as I am today. But the Navy Yard workers that were interviewed on that television program were just as dumb as they'd been 20 years before. The adults I questioned as a boy of 12 were not one iota smarter than they had been as 15-year-olds. They had shut down their thinking and learning apparatus. They were living creatures that responded to stimuli of the most basic kind, and that was about all. When they were hungry, they looked about for something to eat. Sleep, food, sex. The rest of the time, they absorbed whatever their world happened to present to them. They laughed at the Jack Benny and Fibber McGee and Molly radio programs. They slapped their knees and shook their heads and laughed, and then lapsed back into the partial coma that represented their usual waking state. During the industrial shakeout of the early 80s, we heard this comment again and again. I worked for that company for 30 years, and now I'm out, just like that. To hear them talking, one might think they'd made personal sacrifices for the welfare of the company they'd worked for. They say nothing about the fact that the company paid them for their time on the job and gave them the wherewithal to become anything they might have set their hearts on becoming. It was a fair arrangement. They were not kidnapped and pressed into servitude. They applied for their jobs and were accepted and were paid for the level of work they performed. There was no agreement to provide them with work until they were too old and infirm to continue. Why didn't they take the possibility of a layoff into consideration and prepare for such an emergency? My good friends John and Elsie did. When John was laid off from the steel company, he and Elsie sold their home in Ohio and moved to Florida, where they retired in the sunshine. If he'd been laid off years sooner, they had their little real estate business, buying, refurbishing, and selling on the side, which they could have turned to full-time. If they had, they would have become rich. The trouble with John and Elsie was that they, like so many of us, underestimated what they could do working for themselves with the time he was devoting to his job at the steel mill. The job and the regular weekly paycheck was something such people just don't voluntarily give up very often. But for most, the job and the union become father and mother figures on whom they depend for safety as well as survival. The company is so big, with such big smokestacks, and employs so many people and makes so much steel or whatever, well, it seems as though it'll be there forever. And all they need to do is show up, do whatever's necessary to keep the job, and then go home again. All the rest of the time, all those zillions of hours, year after year, decade after decade, they can just allow to pass with as little boredom as possible. Why did no one talk to these people about change? How do such people remain isolated from important information? They are apparently hermetically sealed in ignorance, wrapped and tied in myths and shibboleths. I know. I lived among them. Keep reading like that and you'll ruin your eyes, my father used to say. Reading doesn't hurt the eyes, it's good for them, and especially good for the gray matter just behind them. But all that is gradually changing. Each year more people are moving into the group that thinks. Ideas are the most important things on earth, and each of us has his own or her own idea factory. It comes as standard equipment at birth, the big brain of the Homo sapiens, the single surviving member of the genus Homo. The baby is born, and we hold in our hands a miraculous living creature whose potential is unknown. What will enter that astonishing brain? And from those ingredients, what kind of life will this child fashion? Peter Drucker has characterized public education as an institution designed for the perpetuation of adolescence. In talking with high school girls one morning at breakfast, it was immediately clear that Drucker knew what he was talking about. Of course, chatting with three 17-year-old girls for 30 minutes does not constitute much of an in-depth study, but those with whom I come in contact as clerks in stores and on the telephone seem to offer little in the way of encouragement. The average man who likes to fish is not a particularly good fisherman. It's believed that 10% of the fishermen catch 80% of the fish caught. The average bowler is not a very good bowler. The average golfer is not a very good golfer, and the list goes on and on. As someone once wrote, most of us do only as much as we must do in order to get by without too much discredit. That's good enough is a commonly heard remark, and it usually means it's really not very good at all. And it might pass for the life story of all too many people in the most prosperous nation with the most yawning opportunities the world has ever known in the history of human civilization. It's too bad that thinking is not a required course in the public schools. Not remembering, which is what most schoolwork is about, but thinking 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on, right into the higher realms of university education. It's the highest function of which the human being is capable, and it's not taught in our nation's schools. Thinking is taken for granted. What every working person should receive upon finishing the training program offered by his employer, if there is such a program, is a tape cassette program and printed material entitled Your Life and Your Work. In it would be found much of the material we're dealing with here, plus such things as recommended savings plans, emergency planning, and simple aptitude tests designed to help the person find the main area of his inherent competence. All this should be fascinating to the person. It opens up all kinds of interesting windows of opportunity. Options, options, options. The very things we need if we're to make the kinds of plans that will maximize, at least to some degree, what we are and what we can do. The program would have a section headed, "You have lost your job," and the section would deal with that subject. What can you do that the community wants or needs? The community being the community or the entire United States or the free world. A good friend of mine, Derm Barrett of Ontario, Canada, a business consultant, devoted 800 hours to learning Spanish so thoroughly that he now holds business seminars in numerous Latin American countries. It opened up a whole new world of interest and opportunity for him. 800 hours, about the same time most working people devote to their jobs in just 20 weeks. Learning the Spanish language means learning or beginning to learn about an infinitely rich and fascinating culture. And if anyone needs modern business know-how, it's Latin America. When Derm Barrett explained over the telephone how he had taken on the job of learning Spanish using his own principles of time management and goal setting, and how rewarding the resulting experiences were and are, I could feel his excitement and enthusiasm. His options had doubled. And how foreigners love us when we speak to them in their native tongue. Good ideas are wondrous, delightful, magical things. They explain why people sometimes earn vastly greater incomes after retirement than they ever did on the job to which they so assiduously clung for 35 or 40 years. With a pension providing a safe base below which they know their income cannot fall, they find they have the confidence to pursue those ends and ideas they lacked the courage to pursue when they were working. That's fine. There's nothing carved in marble about when we should do what we ought to do. Any time will do. But we hear such people say, "I should have done this 30 years ago. My God, think where I would have been today. And think of the fun we would have had." The fact is, there's no such thing as security as long as we're alive. Security may only be found at both ends of life, before and after, not during. If we're looking for security during our lifetimes, we're looking for something that simply cannot be guaranteed. Insecurity is our natural state. It's not the chimera, the fire-breathing, multi-legged and clawed monstrosity we think it is. Insecurity can mean autonomy and gives us the options we need for interest and challenge in our lives. Insecurity brings out the best in us. It makes us press upon ourselves. It doesn't hurt to have 6 months or a year's income tucked away someplace. That also gives us freedom and autonomy. It gives us time to make a change. A good idea is an idea that results in a change that is beneficial, and good ideas come in all shapes and sizes. A good idea means change, and a great money-making good idea needn't come up with anything radically new. There's a larger success lurking in everything that is successful already through good ideas. If there's a modest business in town that's earning a profit for its owner, it can be improved to the point of earning a much larger profit. Don't ever say, "I'd like to get to the point where I can start taking things easy." Certainly you can arrange for the hard work to be done by others, but you want to keep thinking and planning for the future. If you don't, you'll die. Once a person runs out of anything interesting to do, he starts the long downward slide. He begins to fall apart. Things start going wrong. After you die, you can take it easy. The people who live longest are those people who never run out of something to do. They're farmers who have new crops to plant and harvest, fresh cows to milk, and 100 other chores that demand attention. And they're teachers who have a new class every year, or writers who get through writing on one subject and are soon off on another. And they're people who never run out of ideas. When they finally do come to the end of their lives, they vanish like the image from a suddenly broken motion picture film. We learn in reading Ortega that we are the only creatures on the planet who are born into a natural state of disorientation with our world. All other creatures are at home in their world, controlled entirely by instinct and reacting automatically to whatever stimuli affects them. They never have to ask, "What will I do?" Why was this pre-planned state denied us? Because we're the only creatures with the power to create our own worlds within the world in which we find ourselves. An awesome power indeed. That's why ideas are the greatest things on earth, for it's ideas that shape our lives. Unfortunately, with all too many of us, it's the lack of great ideas that shape our lives by their absence. A poet once wrote, "Blessed is the man who has found his work." A great idea indeed, For the man or woman who has found an unending vein of interest to explore, the future represents a happy prospect. And let me repeat another great idea. The right work exists for each of us. If we have not yet found it, we can do no better than to continue our explorations until we do find it. Another great idea. Our rewards all the years of our lives will be in direct proportion to our service. We live in order to serve one another.